Loki and Isa waited in deep silence, hidden behind the trees not far from the fortress ramparts. Utgard was very different from Asgard on this point, where the golden fortress was high and above the city, more brilliant than any jewel in Asgard. The fortress of Utgard, known as the strongest of 9 realms, was gray and threatening. The city was built in the mountain itself, and at top of the mountain stood the fortress protected by high ramparts. Everything was made of gray and hard stone. Even Thor wouldn't be able to break it with his mighty Mjolnir. After gaining some more information about the Jonum being nobleman coming up with his army, Loki and Isa had slowly made their way towards the top of the mountain, avoiding all the guards by hiding behind the trees around the fortress. The nobleman said to be arriving soon, with his personal army and maids, of course. Like the cartridge, they would all come on carts filled with trunks and boxes. "Are you sure they'll come by here and not a side gate?" Isa asked in a low voice. "I'm sure," Loki answered simply, without bothering to look at her. "Why?" "Because as a prince, I know these kinds of ceremonial functions. A war is coming against Asgard. Fortune needs to be reassured by its people, by showing off the power of his allies, by making them come by the main roads to his main gates." He explained as calmly as he could, despite the obvious annoyance. Isa fell silent, both of them waiting once again. Loki had explained his plan several times to her, to make sure she had understood right away, and now they had nothing to do but wait. The girl tucked in a lock of hair behind her ear before realizing it was still held up with the hair stick. She glanced at Loki for a moment before flushing and breaking the silence. "But by the way, the hair stick. I need to—" "Shush! They're coming," he hissed, cutting her silently. They heard those 2 horses and footsteps of the warriors before seeing them, but when the first horses appeared, carried the nobleman wearing huge armor, face held up and gaze ready for battle. The 2 spies could not help but shiver. He was huge, and even for Jonum, much bigger than Thor, and the latter was really big, even for an Asgardian. His horse was the biggest Loki had ever seen, bigger than the Selpnir himself, to catch on such a fierce man. There are only 2 horses, likely carrying his advisors, allowing a small group of soldiers, all big and carrying spears, swords and shields. This cortege looked more than an army going for battle than just a simple meeting with a king, which meant that the war was almost inevitable at this point. Loki realized with dread. Then followed a group of maids, walking much more calmly than the army. Finally was an interesting most Loki and Isa. The carts soon they passed in front of them. The 2 spies ran from the forest in complete silence, fell behind on unwatched rear of the last cart and climbed up in it, holding behind a tarpaulin. Isa looked up at Loki but said nothing, a knee at the bottom of the cart and the other raised, both ready to jump out if necessary. They could feel every single stone in the wagon rolled over, and every hole it fell as the powerful horses pulled them abruptly up the mountain towards the gates. They heard the sound of the stone-huge stores being opened, and both enveloped in such a short moment by the green light of their cedar, dropping their illusion of the giants they had kept up till then. They would have used an invisibility spell and walked past the guards, or found another way, but Loki had noticed the same spell, protecting the gates and ramparts that protected Asgard. It broke any other spell at that moment that you could put your foot in through the entrance of any kind. If they had gone with the invisibility spell, it would have disappeared, and would have to raise an alarm. Loki saw through the little space between the 2 tarpaulins that they were entering the gates, and they were now in the inner court. His heart missed a beat, but no alert sounded off, which meant they had infiltrated Asgard fortress with success. Thankfully, once they had passed the gates and ramparts, their cedar could be used once again. Otherwise, Loki would have had to look terribly bored if he didn't pull any tricks behind Asgard's fortress. He breathed out the breath that he was holding, and waited several minutes for the wagon to come to a stop completely. He made a sign to Isa and after checking the surroundings and realizing that they were behind the fortress itself, they climbed out of the wagon and ran for cover behind a wall. Still hidden, Loki saw several Jonans going in and out of the fortress by a side door. Taking the appearances of a typical Jonan working for the king, the pair advanced calmly and entered the door, making their way in the huge stony palace. Loki glanced around, more shocked than he expected to be at the sight of the very powerful tapestries on the walls, as well as delicately decorated armor. He had been taught by the Jonans were monsters. He never thought they would be able to make such art. It's beautiful, Isa, under a disguise of a Jonam, murmured to him after admiring particularly pretty tapestry. Loki nodded absent-mindedly, still shaken by his revolution. He still had studied the mountain giants' language and commerce because this knowledge was necessary as a prince of Asgard, but he had never imagined his enemies would have such delicate and artistic side. Those tapestries were as beautiful, if not more, than the ones made by his own mother, the Queen Frigga, known as the best weaver in the Nine Realms. He was brought back to reality by his companion when the Volva shook his sleeve and gave a nod towards the end of the hall, where a man and 3 soldiers were walking, talking to one another. Lord Nolan only wants Sir Ari and Sir Ericure with him, when he will be speaking with His Majesty King Forgnor. The 3 of you will have to keep an eye on the entrances and exits of the throne room. Don't even think about bothering any of them, or Sir Ari would be the one taking care of you. Is that clear? The 3 men quickly nodded, paling at the very name of Sir Ari. The man ordered them to follow him. Loki and Isa went after them without a word, understanding each other perfectly. They walked as quietly as cats. Loki quickly put a hand on the last man's mouth to smother his cry as a dagger cut the man's throat quickly and efficiently. The body went numb against him, and he pulled the dead man behind a wall. Still in silence, Loki noticed that Isa had done the same effective job on the other man on the other side down the hall. They shared a glance and with a nod, falling into steps behind the man and the 3rd soldier. After being enveloped in the green light of their setter, they reappeared as the 2 dead soldiers, right when the man turned around, frowning. "Did you hear anything?" he asked. 2 spies, and the 3rd one, who looked lost and innocent as a Jonan can look as, all shook their heads. The man shrugged and kept walking, the others following him. Loki had a hard time not laughing when he realized how smoothly it had gone, that they would infiltrate the throne room itself. He couldn't hope for anything better than this occasion. He thanked the Norns for giving him such an easy path to accomplish his mission. After a few minutes of walking, the 3 soldiers entered the throne room and went to their different spots. Loki looked around quickly. The room was huge, but nowhere as huge as the Asgardian throne room, and as gray as the rest of the fortress. There were massive windows letting out in the sunlight, but he also noticed banners hanging from the walls with arms of Jonam's main families. There were wash basins with burning fires all across the room. But what caught his eye was the huge throne room on the new stairs which King Forgnor sat. His son, the Crown Prince Bonjorn, was sitting with the throne at the bottom of the stairs, looking as terrible as always. Loki had met King Forgnor and his son several times during the diplomatic meetings. They never lasted. It was always too tense as the giants left as soon as possible, which was most appreciated by the Asgardian court. Loki hated Bonjorn with a violent and rude. At first, he had reminded Loki of Thor until Bonjorn showed up and twisted the bloodthirsty he really was. Thor wasn't really the brightest mind or the purest man, even if he was willing to go to war any time. He wouldn't kill whoever displeased him. As for Forgnor, he certainly appeared as calm and willing to discuss the terms, but if he was disrespected, he would glare until someone felt uneasy and apologize. Odin always ended up laughing about this habit of Forgnor's as soon as he was alone, but his closest advisors, all the father was the only one with the gaze fierce enough to hold it up against Forgnor. He is no fool, unlike his son, but he has hot blood raging for battle, Odin had once said. All the father had never been more right. Loki could see the rage burning slowly in his dark blue eyes of Forgenar. He sat in his throne. He appeared calm, but his gaze was furious and screaming for war. He seemed to want more than anything. Loki had realized that Forgenar had been waiting for centuries to have a good reason to go to war against Asgard, and now he was making it happen. Forgenar, on the other hand, seemed eager and impatient, always moving on his throne, his bright blue eyes almost mad with the idea of coming into battle. He shared his father's sandy blonde hair. Both of them wore it long and messy, decorated with braids and golden pearls, as if the crown prince knew an Asgardian was staring at him. He suddenly grinned, a feverish thirst appearing in his eyes, as if he was imagining himself cutting the Asgardian prince's throats. Lord Nolan, accompanied by Sir Ari and Sir Eriki, Your Majesty, the man announced before opening the huge doors. The huge Jonum had been made Loki so uncomfortable earlier he entered. The sound of his boots on the floor resonated through the whole room. He had long, dark brown hair that he wore braided, and his eyes were icy blue, darkening with kohl. His brown and black furs and his armor made him look even more impressive than his body already was. The two men followed close behind him. The first had black short hair and golden eyes, and the second had bright red hair. They were both big enough to compete with Thor when it came to muscles, but just behind Lord Nolian, they had looked like children. Nolian, old friend, Forgenar exclaimed, opening his eyes and grinning, but didn't move from his throne. Welcome to in Asgard. He made a pause, turning towards the two men behind Nolan. Sir Ari Eriki, the king added with nods at those two men. Ari was the black-haired one, and Eriki was the red-haired one. They both bowed down to the king, but it was Nolan who spoke up. King Forgenar and Prince Budjorn, he saluted with a sort of nod in his head. Loki almost rolled his eyes at the lack of his manners. He was most certain that his mother would have shrieked and shouted at him how to properly talk to royalty, but neither the king nor the prince seemed insulted. I believe you are aware of the reasons for you coming here, the king started, serious once again. I heard a lot of things before receiving your message, but I want to know what is true, and it isn't in the middle of all those tales of war and spies, he answered with a low voice that rage and boom sound like thunder. Loki didn't want to hear him yelling in anger. I sent a spy in Asgard, which you know. Yeah, of course I know. I was there when you proposed it at Jonunum's last council. I said I was supporting you in seeking for war against those filthy Asgardians. It took us some centuries, but I will finally take revenge for my sister, Forgenar muttered in a hard voice. His gaze suddenly turned cold. Loki thought deeply, trying to remember who his sister was and then it hit him. Forgenor's sister was the previous queen of Jonunum, Queen Canorda, who had died 3 centuries ago. A foolish war against Asgard, but Odin had stopped her madness, and his brother took the throne after she was killed in battle. Her death brought you to the throne, Your Majesty. It was your benefit, wasn't it? Ari asked with an evil smile. The king reflected the same smile and nodded. Indeed, but it would not go as a good excuse to go to war against Asgard. Plus, thanks to my spy, we have already received a very interesting information, which is why I asked the lords of Jonunum to join me in this war. Loki froze despite himself. That 1 or 2 lords could join their king in war was more than possible. According to what they had just said, however, was the whole council of Jonunum had been given the occurred for the king to send a spy. Forgenar had simply mentioned the Mountain Guardian lords, but the lords of Jonunum meant a war, not just for the mountain giants, but all of giants. Asgard is preparing for a massive attack against Jonunum in order to wipe us out. They want us all dead and our realm to be theirs, Forgenar exclaimed, raising in anger. What? Nolan shouted, while his 2 advisors looked complete shock and revolution. Loki's mouth fell open in astonishment as he sensed Isa's gaze on him. As shocked as he was, Asgard wasn't preparing a war against Jonunum. If Odin had planned everything against him, he would have told his sons. An Asgardian prince frowned while the conversation continued. The father cannot do such thing. The other realms would stop following him if he were to try and do such a thing. It's madness, Eric exclaimed. Nonetheless, we have the proof of such intention, Bonjour interrupted, his grin wide and wild at such the idea of war. He made a sign of his hand while his father sat again. The man who was hidden in the shadows brought a letter to Nolan and his companions, indicating all the proof the spy had gathered. The Lord had frowned upon greed, and sudden rage filled him, which took him even more impressive and possible. Loki was dying to snatch the paper and show his proof, but he had no way to reach it without revealing himself. Odin had gone mad, Nolan declared with such thunderous voice. Is your spy sure? Ari asked, raising a suspicious eyebrow. More than sure. He is faithful to us and Jonam. He has found all the proof and managed to cause mayhem amongst the Asgardians' court to destabilize them. He used magic to turn all of Queen Frigga's maids against her, and now we know Odin sent one of his spies here to Utgard. Any idea who this spy is? Eric asked. Loki glanced at Isa. She was trying to look motionless, but her eyes showed slow shaken and relieved to know her mother was innocent. Now worried Loki more, however, was that they knew about the spy, even if they didn't appear to know his identity. No idea. Several of his spies went there, and our spy had been following them, but he lost track of that spy after the Misty Mountain. Loki remembered what Isa had told him, that something or someone had been following them from the Frost landing site, killing off every single one of the Asgardian who were supposed to help him. The Misty Mountain was the mountain they had climbed through the crossway. This meant it had worked and the spy had lost their trail. We only heard from the spy recently. He told us he was going back to Asgard in order to know what all the father was preparing. We don't know much where the Asgardian spy went, then? Harry asked, frowning. It was more likely he tried to go through the crossway. The fool is probably dead by now, Bjorn answered with a snicker. What are you planning exactly, Fontenor? Nolan asked, giving the paper for the proof of the back to the young man, who had hid in the shadows once again. To avenge my sister, with the excuse of this threat from Odin. I declare war of Asgard, and we shall destroy Odin and his family, his allies, and his entire realm. He wants to make Jotunheim his, but we will be sure the ones taking over Asgard. We'll make the Golden City our new Jotunheim capital, he shouted, throwing his fist against the armrest of his throne. Nolan grinned and then took a step forward, his dark aura sending shivers down the two spies' spines. Count me and my army as your ally, my King Fontenor, he exclaimed. The king smirked and then tilted his head slightly towards his son, who was grinning like a fool. Good, now my son, will you please be kind enough to kill the spy who infiltrated our fortress? He asked with a cheerful voice. Loki didn't even have time to react that Bonjorn had taken a crossbow from his side and shot. The arrow hit Loki's shoulder. He let out a cry of pain as it flung him backwards. He fell against the wall with his hand breaking the arrow as he glared up at Jonas, clenching his teeth. The king and the prince looked slightly satisfied with their surprise, while the shock on the free nobleman's face was erased with anger. This fool is dead by now, Bjorn said, repeating the same words as before, which now sounded like a threat than a statement. You should have stayed lost in the crossway. Your death would have been much more or less painful than the one waiting you here in Outgard, he exclaimed. Guards, grab him, the king ordered. Loki tried to move, but two Jotunheim guards grabbed him, lifting him up on his legs and pushing him forward. One of them pressed his hand hard against his injury, more blood flowing from his shoulder. Raging scream escaped the spy's throat while he was pushed down on his knees in front of King Jonar. The prince's arms were kept behind their back, which hurt his shoulder even more, but Loki glared at the king with a vicious gaze, clenching his fist and jaw. Drop your illusion, Fontenor ordered, or we shall make this more painful by draining your cider, Ari proposed with a wicked grin. Loki, still under the disguise, swallowed hard, and his mother had told him about the ways of torturing cider users, forcing them to drop illusions or spells. He had never gone through such a thing, but he definitely didn't want to try. He clenched his jaw and took a deep breath while green light flickered around him, making him appear who he really was. Prince Loki, oldest son of Asgard. They all looked shocked because most weren't expecting Prince Loki to be the spy because they were impressed. The first one to break the silence was Bjorn with his sudden loud laugh. Prince Loki! I can't believe it! Since when does Odin send his own sons to spy on his enemy? Eriki asked, snickering. Loki didn't answer, sitting in the burning glare to the king. I knew that he was desperate and ready to try anything to win a war, but go as far as sacrificing his son? What son is he anyway? He is a setter user, barely able to hold a fight against his own brother, Eri said, lifting up his foot. The Asgardian prince didn't have time to try any such moves before Eri kicked him in the face violently, laughing joyfully. Frozen in shock, too angry to feel the pain, Loki stared coldly at the ground, his raven black hair falling in front of his eyes like a dark curtain. Odin had given the best hostage we could ever ask for. While his son chains at our side, Odin would have no choice but to give up his realm for your pathetic life. Oh, except this, if this is what we intended to do from the beginning. I mean, who would want such a failure as a son? Nolan mocked with an evil grin, laughing, jerking his head backwards. He has such a failure. I can't believe Odin has such a son. I'm so sorry for him. He is different from Thor. Thor is so bright and this prince is so disappointing. He is nothing like his father and brother. He is Loki, after all. Loki hated what had happened to him in the labyrinth more than over, and the way it opened his eyes to many things, especially that the Nine Realms knew he was a disappointment to his father. Perhaps Nolan was right, and Odin had agreed to send Loki to spy on Jonum solely to get rid of the embarrassment. Whatever it was right or not, Loki could not let those vile mountain giants use him as a card against Asgard. If anything, this rage was more than useful to fight. Loki's cold green eyes turned around to the men, looking at him. His gaze had turned so vile, so vicious, so hard and cold that they all took a step back, their hearts missing a beat at such a ferocious and raging Loki. He saw a black flicker at one of the windows from the corner of his eyes, and he just had time to recognize the two black birds before they flew off. Hugin and Mun. They all father ravens. They would fly back to Asgard and share with all the father had to know and be seen. Loki didn't have to think any longer about the presence of the two birds, his thoughts being brought back by the king, trying to shake off his embarrassment at being so suddenly uncomfortable. Fornjor laughed, but the sound was off and bitter, not convincing. A hostage? Don't be foolish. Let's send him back to Asgard, he exclaimed. His son and his allies all turned towards him, confused, before he grinned darkly at Loki's figure, kneeling the injured and weak at his feet. In little pieces, he said with a wide smirk. This way Odin would have no choice but to declare war as revenge. This will be his fall, he murmured with a cold satisfaction. His allies smiled as well, imitating the cold, mad look he had. Fornjor, a dagger in hand, stepped forward, looking down at Loki, struggled to free himself from the guard's grip, but the other man was much stronger than him. You've always annoyed me, Loki. It will be such a pleasure to cut you into pieces. Let your blood be the first to flood. Let the blood of Odin's house taint our skins when we get ready for battle, he exclaimed, lifting the blade. Fornjor grinned and suddenly gasped, attracting everyone's attention. He moaned as everyone noticed the guard had silently approached him with the commotion, stabbed the prince in the back, too shocked to do or say anything. Isa, still disguised as a guard, quickly lifted up her hand and cut his throat with her own dagger. The blood spurted suddenly, splashing on the ground against the four men and their prisoner. No! King Fornjor yelled, surging forward to grab his son's body as it fell down lifeless. But Bjorn! He shouted, voice shaking with fury. Isa dropped her illusion, and then seeing Nolan, Eriki, and Ares' shocked expression. Upon seeing their prince killed by another spy, who turned out to be a woman, she jumped forward and hit the guard, holding Loki with her dagger, his throat deeply cut. He yelled in pain, lifting up his hands stained in carmine before falling backwards. Loki, now free, got up and turned around to run, followed closely by Isa. Catch them! Catch them both and bring me their dead bodies, Fornjor shouted, still holding his son's body against him. His voice was furious. His body was trembling in rage and pain, while his face was covered in the sun's blood and tears rolled down his cheeks. "Kill them!" he yelled. Thornjorn's loud voice made three of his allies jump, and they started to run after Loki and Isa, who had already reached the door. The prince threw daggers at the guards, who advanced to stop them, when he used a setter against the door to push it open, while Isa made green lights appear in her hands. The light turned into long wisps that grabbed the closest waistbands of fire, and with a gesture, they flew against the three men, who stopped lifting their arms to protect their faces. The flames and sparks flew on the ground against the banners on the wall, quickly spreading and creating a barrier of fire at the door, blocking the two fugitives' escape. "Catch them!" Thornjorn shouted again. Every time a guard appeared in the halls, alerted by the yells or fire, either Loki or Isa knocked them down with a setter before continuing, trying to make their way outside the fortress. "Any ideas?" Isa shouted, looking at Loki. "Run!" he yelled. "Brilliant!" she mocked. Two guards blocked their way, and the prince pulled out a dagger, surging toward one of them. It went straight to his heart, and the god turned into a round to hit the other guard with his fist. The guard stumbled backwards, but lifted up his sword and shield, glaring viciously at his adversary. He jumped forward, his blade all ready to hit Prince Loki, but he moved out of the way, and with his dagger sliced the guard's wrist holding the sword, the nerves cut and the blood flowing. The guard yelled in pain and tried to take a step back. He never had time because Loki's dagger flew to his throat when he fell on the ground in the pool of blood. The prince followed closely behind the setter user, ran, finally finding a door leading outside as they heard the running footsteps of more guards. They landed in the courtyard where several maids and workers screamed in terror and ran. Loki and Isa ran forward when they realized there wasn't a rampart. It was a side road for those coming from the city into the fortress. Loki and Isa accelerated as they heard the guards flooding from the fortress surrounding them. They both rose at the edge of the platform, almost falling off as they stared down at the steep cliff as high as the mountain with the river raging down the valley. Loki pulled Isa backwards as they turned around, daggers ready while more guards arrived. "Catch them alive! I want to torture them slowly before cutting them into pieces." Nolan's voice resonated through the courtyard. Loki looked around as Jonam guards wearing armors and carrying spears, shields, and swords at their sides. There were over 50 surrounding them, slowly trying to catch them. "Loki," Isa murmured nervously, licking her lower lip in panic as they looked around, completely outnumbered. "Right now would be a great time for a brilliant idea," she whispered, her voice trembling anxiously. Some guards were pushed away by Nolan and his two advisors. They were still stained with the prince's blood and glared furiously at the two cornered spies. The huge brown hair man laughed dryly upon seeing them trapped. "What could you possibly do, trickster? You're ours now, Loki," he exclaimed with a bitter, dark laugh. "You will be the cause of Asgard's fall." "I won't give you the satisfaction," Loki hissed with a cold glare, moving his dagger between his fingers. He suddenly turned around to grab Isa's arm and jump off the cliff with her. "No!" Nolan yelled, searching forward as fast as possible. Loki and Isa shouted as they fell down the cliff, right toward their death.
What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, stay pretty.